Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. I see participants are joining as we speak. And as everyone tunes in, we're just going to spend a few minutes letting everyone join and getting ready. So stay tuned for us to kick it off.
Everybody.
Hi there.
If you're just joining, we're really excited to kick off this conversation about cementing your employer brand. We're just waiting a minute or two for everyone to join, so stay tuned. And as we wait a minute or two, please start to think about any questions you may have over the course of the discussion. We want to hear from you in the chat function at the bottom of the screen. If you're just tuning in here, we're about to kick off our conversation on cementing your employer brand. We're just waiting a minute or two for everyone to join. And as we wait, please think of your questions that you want to ask our panelists here. We'll be having an active chat while we also listen into the discussion. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. I'm going to pass it off to Lori, and I will be your kind of contact in the chat box throughout this conversation. So again, please feel free to add in your questions, your thoughts on the discussion, and we're excited to have you here. All right, Lori, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Comit's second webinar in our new series of webinars where what we're doing is we're bringing experts together in the space of talent, employer brand, culture, diversity, inclusion, all kinds of hot topics, so that while we have this time and space right now in this very strange world we're in, we can do some knowledge sharing, do our part, bring people together, network, and try to solve for some things and identify some cool opportunities that are coming up in this time. So if you've listened before, if you've tuned in before, you know I'm a huge push for, there are a lot of untapped opportunities right now. We are gifted with a slowdown period. Unfortunately, the circumstances are not favorable, but we are gifted with a slowdown period, which is a great time for reevaluating, re-strategizing, and reprioritizing some of the things that you're doing. So, and it seems as though, in the grand scheme, our people are looking to us, right? HR professionals, leaders, for answers right now. Like, so what should we be doing? What are some ways that we can be adding value right now? So we want to give answers to everyone on the line and be a resource for that. So I'm here, I'm Lori Golden. I'm the head of Comit Elastic Recruiting, which is a malleable program that helps companies scale talent. I'm also have Rafael Marcus, who was a prior head of employer brand for UiPath. We worked together there. He also, prior to that, comes from LinkedIn and had a lot of great employer brand campaign involvement with many different companies there. So he brings a breadth and wealth of a lot of different experiences and information for us. Ray Ferreira with Verge, he has a history as well, more on the marketing and branding side from the agency side of the house. He's done a lot of work with some large corporations in telecommunications, and he is now working on his own in a project capacity doing engagements for companies. So I want to welcome both Raf and Ray to the conversation, and we're going to jump in and start asking some engaging employer branding questions of our experts and have a discussion that way. If you have questions, please do feel free to drop them in the chat. Adrian labeled up there as Comeet Webinar, is going to be moderating all of your questions, as well as dropping information, polls, and links in as we go. So buckle up, you're in for a treat here. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'll pull up my first question. We are targeting, of course, we've got all kinds of leaders on the phone. We've got HR leaders, we've got founders, we've got C-level executives of larger companies, we've got, smaller company leaders. So I'm not going to take anything for granted. I want to start with the basic question, like, what is employer branding, or talent branding, as some people call it? And why does it matter? And we're going to start with Raf here, and then we'll hear from Ray.
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me, Lori. Really exciting to be here. I love talking about all this stuff. Can talk about it for days on end. So what a great way to spend some time during the quarantine. So, for the question of what is employer brand or talent brand, essentially it's the thing that is living inside of a company, right, inside the walls of a company, that you don't necessarily have necessarily specific words for. I mean, there are words that you can use to express it, but it's kind of like the feeling of being inside of a company, and then that feeling being expressed outside of the company, is basically how I would simply explain what employer branding is. And very simple comparison, it's like a consumer brand, but for the people in your company, what it's like to work there. So that's just the simplest way to explain it. And I'm sure Ray has something to add as well. And then the other part of why it's so important, also to keep it very, very simple, and we can I'll go into some details when we get to how to get buy-in and all that stuff. But why it's so important is because the most important thing in any business, as we've probably heard over and over again, is it's people. And so if attracting great people is really important to your business, which it probably is for every business, then arguably there is actually nothing more important than the employer brand. The consumer brand, or the brand focusing on customers, or on partners, or the corporate brand, are all important as well. Don't get me wrong, but I would argue, and obviously I'm biased, that the brand essence of the entire company is the most important thing, and then how that it's expressed in the employer brand is not second to many things. So that's my perspective. Ray, I don't know, I'm sure you have plenty to add.
Sure. Thanks for a great fundamental question. Let's get this all straight from the start. From the traditional definition, right, is that it's the reason that talented people want to come and work for you. But in reality, for companies that are either in control of their employer brand or who aren't in control of their employer brand, because your company has a brand no matter what, it's the sum of all of the impressions that your company makes as an employer. And that could be no impression at all, because people may not think of you as an employer. But it could be a positive or a negative impression. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later when we talk about other sources of information. But the other side of it is that your brand needs to be unique, because if you're controlling your brand, you need to help people make a decision. It's there to help people who are on a journey of exploring your organization or working in your organization. So they're part of a candidate journey, or they're part of a life cycle, an employment life cycle. And at any given point, different decisions come up, and your brand helps them make those choices in the moment. And those choices relate to, as Raphael said, they relate to feelings first, and it relates to logical information second, because people in all aspects go to their gut feeling to make those decisions. So that's the reason that it's so important, is that it lives there right at the edge of the decision process for candidates, for employees, for people who want to describe the company that they work for, or for people that want to engage the talent that works for them within an organization. That brand is there to help define that. And if you don't control it, it defines it for you.
Yeah, and I'll actually, Ray, I'll add something to what I had said earlier, just to go into a little more detail, which I think will be helpful, as to why it's so important, based on what you're saying. Just an example of why it's so important and what it is. Think of a company like, just randomly, like the Home Depot, right? They have a website that gets, probably 50, 100 million people a day, right? In normal times. I don't know what's going on now, but actually probably higher now. But they have a huge e-commerce platform. It's a $90 billion a year business. And, they need great engineers, right? Software engineers and, application engineers and technologists. Now, if they aren't working on their employer brand, and a recruiter messages or sends an outreach to a potential engineer or somebody they want to hire from a great company that, has a great pedigree and everything, what's the first thing that somebody thinks of when they see Home Depot, right? Do they think hammers and nails? Do they think big pieces of wood? Or do they think a platform that 50 million people a day visit that needs to scale and be efficient?
Security, yeah.
Right, and security. So if it's the former, good luck to Home Depot. If it's the latter, great job, Home Depot. And that's, kind of just an example, not a real one. I'm just making stuff up, just an example, but I hope that helps people understand the why it's so important part.
Yeah, some of the most compelling situations that we've gotten into in doing qualitative research, we learned that people didn't see the company as someone who employed that type of person or someone like them, and that someone like me, or the them, can take a lot of different directions. It can play out in different dimensions. It can be their profession. It can be the kind of up and coming person that they are. But sometimes that's the most basic understanding that a brand has to help people with, the type of people that you really hire.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll mention is the why it's important is also the impact on the bottom line for the business in terms of sales, especially for B2C companies. So Virgin Media in the UK, Richard Branson's company, did a study quite a few years ago, I don't know, 5 years ago or something, seeing how the candidate experience affected cable subscriptions. And they lost $5 million a year because what they found is they lost $5 million a year in subscriptions because people didn't feel good in the interview process with them. And, interviewing isn't necessarily all encompassing of employer brand, but it is a part of it. Because you want the interviewing to express the brand properly. But the bigger picture is that, if I were to buy a cup of coffee from Starbucks, do I feel good about it because they put their baristas through college? And that, that's about their employees, not about their product. But it can resonate so deeply and so strongly that it could actually affect consumer behavior. So I think that's, that's the final point I'll make on why it's important. It's not just for hiring, right?
I think we're in a period of time where we're seeing more of those feel-good messages than ever before.
Exactly.
Yeah. Is it greenwashing or whitewashing, or is it real? That's what people will actually use their wallet to make a decision on.
Sure. We're thrust into the future of work, and certainly this is a hot topic and becomes much more relevant in the new talent landscape as we come out of this. So that's why this is so key and so important. I think that the mindset is going to have to shift on what matters, what's worth investing in, both time and resources, which is a great segue to the next question, which is, so this makes sense to all us talent geeks, what we're saying, but how do you convince somebody who's very revenue driven, numbers, data focused, how do you show them that this matters directly to the bottom line, directly to the talent that is being attracted? Like, how do you make those correlations so that if I want to be a champion in my organization of a stronger employer brand from anywhere, right? From HR, from talent acquisition, from employee engagement, from wherever. But if I want to make a push to be the champion of that, like, where do I start? What is the information that I need to deliver? And how does that need to happen? Raf, let's start with you because you've been very analytics heavy in this, in your experience.
Yeah, sure. And I think from the poll, Adrian, if I have it right, majority was employer branding sits in HR. Is that right? Yeah. So it's 60% sits in HR, 25% in marketing, which is cool to see, and not that surprising that it's kind of divided up this way. The reason I bring that up is because from my experience, both working with talent acquisition teams to help them build strategy for employer branding on LinkedIn, to also doing it myself at UiPath recently and some other projects I'm working on now, it's really hard to get resources. And unfortunately, if you want to be at all aggressive in the marketplace with employer branding, my recommendation would be to try to really get a significant amount of budget to be able to do things, because it gives you options. Now, that's not easy, especially from my experience coming from HR. Now, if you're in marketing, it may be easier, but it's never easy to get a significant budget, kind of no matter what position you're in. So the way I did it and secured, when I was at UiPath, I secured a 7-figure budget just for employer branding, which was awesome, how open and trusting they were. And when I was at LinkedIn helping other, clients or talent acquisition teams try to get budget and approval, I basically used a quantitative approach, right? Because in the end, if you're going to ask for $1 million or $10 million or whatever amount you can get, or $500,000, which is all might sound like scary numbers to a lot of people, you're going to have a very strong business case. So what I have done is basically used statistics that come from some studies. Quite a few come from LinkedIn, but there are plenty out there otherwise. But what we see, or what some data out there that you can use as examples, are that a strong employer brand on average can reduce time to hire by 20%. So that is a great statistic for anyone in talent acquisition, but a CFO doesn't give a shit, because what does that mean to me as a CFO? Well, if any one person that you're trying to hire, and let's say you're trying to hire 100 people, if you're going to hire 100 people, all of those people create some sort of value on an annual level compared to their salary, right? That's how businesses work, that every single person you invest in terms of having on your payroll needs to produce in order to be worth their salary, right? So let's say everyone produces 3 times their salary. Well, you can basically chop that down to daily production, right? X number of dollars are produced every day by this person, this person, this person. And if you're hiring 100 people, you can basically say, well, if I can get those people in 20% faster, maybe that's 10 days faster, that's 10 times the amount of value that each person is producing times the number of people you have to hire. And all of a sudden, the value of bringing people in 20% faster is like staggering for a CFO, or for somebody who actually needs to see the ROI in quantitative form, money-wise. And it's pretty amazing. Another, I'll just do 2 other stats just for people to kind of noodle on. There's a 43% reduction in cost per hire. Think about that. Let's just do simple math. So let's just move it up to 50% for easy math. Let's say it costs you on average $10,000 per hire, and you have to hire 100 people. That's a ton of money. That's $1 million, right? Now, if you decrease that by 50%, you're saving $500,000. I mean, if you can take then half of that, $250,000, and say, I need $250,000 for employer branding, and I will make you back $250,000, it's no brainer, right? And then there's other stats like decrease in attrition and increase in quality of hire, which leads to higher production per employee. So there's all these kind of numbers out there and figures out there that can be turned into quantitative results using how many people you're going to hire, what you estimate in terms of the value that they produce, which is something that I do for some companies, and then just putting it all together. And then you have some simple arithmetic that a CFO should be drooling over, basically. Yeah, so just wanted to throw out some of those, right?
That's where I was going to go with it as well. I mean, you need to speak the language of the people who are making the choices on investing in this. And the value chain is a critical part of how employees come into an organization. That's what they're there for. Your organization is a business model for turning their work, their relationships, the way they treat customers into value for your organization. And so if we look at the brand as an improver of that value, or if we look at the brand as an inspiration for the impact that you can have in the value chain, then we should be, first of all, we should work inductively, right? And we should build a brand around the value chain, the value that an employee brings in the value chain. But we can also then start to go to numerical information that people in the C-suite are going to be very concerned about. So public image is definitely something that that large organizations spend a good amount of time and money managing. And so there is that public image. The unattended employer brand tends to look like what we see sometimes on Glassdoor. It doesn't take long to look around Glassdoor to find people that have let the weeds grow in their public image when it comes to that employer brand. But we can also then quantify it in speed to hire, retention rate, employee engagement, and what that means for absenteeism, what it means for workforce demographics. Are you getting the people at the right age levels, the right experience levels that you need, the right diversity levels that you need? And how can the brand impact that? And that's really important stuff. The quality of hire, how quickly can you get, time to hire is one thing, but the quality and the frustration of the hiring manager who sees a slate that is, mediocre, and they're not happy with it, at least by their judgment, and maybe they don't know what they're looking for. But the quality of the demand that you have. Do you have a trickle? Do you have a torrent? Everybody wants a torrent, but sometimes we don't have that kind of demand. And the employer brand can help boost all of those. And we can look at things where we can use money more efficiently when we look at solutions like employer referral or just informal referral and the voice of the employee in public when they talk about your organization, and if they know how to talk about your organization and what their value or what their part in the value chain is. That's all part of the employer brand. I think there are other ways to engage people that we can talk about as we go on, but in terms of rationalizing or quantifying or getting to the numbers and getting to the budget, I think it's best to go to the value chain and speak the language of those people that are making the choices.
Yeah, and adding a little bit to the quantitative part that you're mentioning, Ray. I just want to show people, Adrian, if you want to pull up that visual of the matrix, I just want to show people a way that, or my primary way of figuring out how much budget I might need. And this is just high level. The devil's in the details, and that's like an entire thing by itself. But what you're looking at is a way that I try to figure out, how much budget will I need and where should it go? And there's more on this for the future parts of the series, but basically what you're looking at is a matrix that essentially for core roles that I would need, these are just examples, just random, but let's say I had to hire these groups of people or was hired as a consultant to advise a company on how much money to invest and where to invest it. I would basically look at 3 metrics and then graph it out like this. And we'll show you later why I graph it out like this. But essentially what I want to know is for each specific audience that we need to attract, software engineers in Chicago in the top left, sales in New York, sales in Chicago, accountants in Chicago, customer support in Nashville. What is the level of demand in the marketplace? So that's third party, just or macroeconomic. What is the demand for those audiences? There's different ways to get that information. LinkedIn Talent Insights is one of them, but I'm sure there's a million other ways. The other one is more microeconomic, which is how much engagement do they have with our company right now, right? And both of those things together, what's the demand and what's the engagement, will help you figure out how aggressive or not aggressive you need to be in your both paid and earned media and content generation and all that stuff. And that's basically what this matrix tells us. So what we see here, and the size of the circle that you see is the size of the talent pool, which is also a big factor, right? If there's a huge talent pool, okay, then you have more people to choose from. You have more options. It's less risky. If you have a very small talent pool, you have to be a bit more careful, a bit more strategic, and more focused. And here, what you can see, again, just a random example, software engineers in Chicago would be very high demand and very low engagement. Maybe this is, a family bank in Chicago or in the Midwest or something, as an example, and they need engineers. Nobody's ever heard of them, or no engineers have really ever heard of them from an employer branding standpoint, meaning they're not engaging. They're not visiting their website, not visiting LinkedIn, not their Glassdoor page, and the demand is very high. And the talent pool size is a bit moderate, on the smaller side, but kind of moderate. So what do we have to do to attract them, right? We need more budget. We need more resources. Maybe we need to hire an agency to do some creative work for that audience specifically, compared to accountants in Chicago. Seems like they know us, highly engaged, right, to the right of that line, and demand isn't so high. So maybe we can get away with just, using our network, or just, putting job postings up there and not doing too much in terms of investing. And that's how you're going to figure out the best way to spend your money, which will lead to the highest ROI. So I just wanted to show people this and have them understand kind of part of the process that I go through in trying to get buy-in. Lori, did you have
Top left, heavy lift.
Right, exactly. Lori, did you have something to add? You're on mute, I think, Lori. Still on mute, I think.
Okay. Hi. Sorry about that. Yeah, no, I was saying that's a great graph and really useful. That was an incredible tool to go ahead and get the budget that we needed at UiPath, and certainly can be used in pretty much any scenario. And when you start to understand kind of what the talent landscape looks like, what the demand is, what the engagement levels are, I mean, this is a very compelling story, right? And I'm very easily, and pretty much anybody in leadership can appreciate and understand this, because at the end of the day, talent acquisition gets the most focus, right? Like, so when are we getting all these salespeople in New York and these accountants in Chicago? That's the number, that's the metric that everyone's focused on, and so this is a good way to kind of correlate that to why employer brand again matters, and why it's worth spending on, and why it's such a necessary component to attracting top talent. I mean, it's it's the component to it. So great. Ray, do you want to add to that conversation, to that piece?
No. There've been various analytical tools that we've developed, spreadsheets that we share with people, but not on that kind of a scale. But I always love seeing quadrant diagrams like that to help understand so many dimensions of what you're talking about. And I think that one painted a good picture of demand, talent pool size, and your existing engagement out there in the marketplace.
Yep. So now that we've talked a lot about, okay, getting buy-in, you want to champion this in your organization. We know you may have budget or intend to put some budget towards it. And we've shown you a little bit high level about, how to really make that case. And of course, any of these things we can drive in a lot more detail offline, schedule some time with any one of us. But I want to really get into the discovery. So now that you've got everyone's buy-in and they've given you some money, like, how do you start to figure out what your brand essence is? What is the company DNA and identity? How do your internal folks see you? How do people outside see you? Raf, you spoke a lot in the budget conversation about engagement. How do you determine, what that looks like? How you're being perceived in the marketplace?
Yeah, I'll let Ray start with this one, because he's
good. So we need to be clear about looking in a quantitative manner and looking in a qualitative manner at what your company is, how it's perceived in the environment, how it's perceived internally, and make sure that if we're going to build a discovery process, that we do the right things at the right time and understand each for either our own capabilities and our own budgeting perspective, but also for the information that we want to uncover about people. So what I try to do is always remember that this relates to a value chain and a decision process, right? So, when in the absence of all other things, and even in the presence of lots of data, people will make a decision based on gut. And so we need to know what that gut is about, and we need to know what their journey is about, how they move through a decision process. What elements in a process are checkbox elements and get looked at and then pushed aside, and what elements are struggled over, that their decision is made more difficult if they can't come to a quick answer on it. And so those are the things that we like to think about. But we also, when we're looking for those elements that we want to know about the different candidate groups and the different employee groups that we're serving, the audiences that we're looking at, we want to make sure that we understand the little micro elements that each of them wants to find in their work. So once we understand what each segment needs, then we're ready to begin modeling a brand after that. But we want to open the discussion around that value chain. A lot of organizations make the mistake of selling what would be called HR deliverables, and getting just a little bit too rational about what they're offering. And your brand isn't an opportunity to bring out slogans and taglines around HR deliverables. And so you want your discovery process to dig deep for those things that will help people understand what it feels like to work in your organization, and will help them understand almost I call it a Patrick Lencioni 5 dysfunctions of a team level. So and I'll give you the reference information on that, but we want to look at what it is that inspires people in finding what they want to achieve in their life, in knowing what a team can help them achieve together with other people, and then in understanding how that can change the world. And so a lot of the discovery that I work on, the qualitative discovery that I work on, tends to go into this me, we, world model, and asks people, what is it that they're looking for? What is it that we can do together? And then how can that impact the world? But it's not about HR deliverables. It's about you seeing me for who I am. It's about us working together in a way that's comfortable. And then it's knowing that we're changing things for the greater good.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that was
oh, sorry, Ray, were you finished?
No, go ahead.
So yeah, I mean, just to add on to what Ray's saying, you really need to understand how people feel inside your company, right? And unfortunately, going through that process, and I'm sure Ray has tons of stories around this, you're going to evoke some very negative feelings sometimes, right? And it's important that you don't just hear the good stuff, that you also hear the bad stuff. One, so that you know how to shape messaging so that people are prepared properly when they do come into the organization, and that they don't have buyer's remorse or feel bait and switched. So really, really important to do that discovery stuff. The way that I usually approach it is kind of like a pyramid. You think of just a pyramid. At the bottom, the foundation, the base, is the company's values, which should be driving everything, right? A company's values is what should really be driving people's decision-making within a company. And if your behavior is being dictated in a way, or at least influenced by the values of the company, which they should be, then those are the things that are going to kind of create the feeling of working there. And so above the values are kind of the proof points of people living those values within the company. So what I do is similar to Ray, I go deep and try to understand from companies, usually through like focus groups and interviewing and surveys, what are the proof points that show that this company really does live those values, and doesn't also, right? Some of the negative stuff as well. And then from there, you can basically design your employee value proposition pillars. And I think Elise was asking about, how do you build your employer value proposition? It comes from first values, then proof points that are real. And then you can kind of form the pillars. I usually try to aim for 3, but kind of depends on the situation. A few pillars of basically based on the proof points that come from your values. What is it that you offer to the world to basically want to come work here, right? And it's not for everybody, right? So for the people that you would like to have come to work here, what is it that you offer beyond a job, right? Not the what, but what is the why you exist, why you do what you do, and the how. How you do what you do, your culture, the technology you use, the mindset of leadership, what employees do together to connect and collaborate. Those are the things that will help basically build your EVP. And then once you have your EVP pillars or your EVP, that basically will tell you what your brand is, your employer brand, right? Then you can kind of summarize it into 3 words, and then you have your employer brand. I also just wanted to quickly answer Mary's question about the Home Depot analogy. So you were asking how they would change their employer brand to attract tech folk. It's a couple things, and it's obviously a very big question, but they would start with basically what Ray was saying is just deep discovery in the areas, right, that they need people. So they want awesome tech people, go to the current tech team, leadership all the way down to individual contributors, talk to them, and basically using the pyramid method or Ray's fantastic way of doing it as well, figure out what the employer brand or the EVP is for that group, and then invest aggressively. If you're Home Depot, you're in a different situation than you are if you're a B2B company or startup that not many people have heard of, because Home Depot has a brand that everyone in the United States already has some sort of association to. So they're arguably up against more, because going from nobody knows me to, oh, this company sounds awesome is much easier than going from people think of us as hammers and nails to tech supergiant platform. And basically what they need to do is they need to come up with real authentic storytelling and content that comes out of what we just talked about. And then they need to invest aggressively. They need to make sure, guarantee that the story and messaging that is a reflective of their brand, not just, to Ray's point, not just taglines, but actual like deep content that reflects the why and the how of the brand. And they need to guarantee that messaging gets in front of the people they need it to. They can't just hope for it. They can't just put it on their career page and hope that that's enough because they get 10 million people a day on their career page. Is it the right people? Probably not. If engineers think, hammers and nails, then it's probably not the right people coming to your career page. So it doesn't even matter for that specific audience. So there needs to be proactive, right? So if they're in the top left quadrant of the graph I just showed, which is probably the case for a company like Home Depot, then they need to invest aggressively in the storytelling and the promotion of the storytelling. And essentially what they need to do is they need to shift perception in the mind of the user. And that is not done overnight. That's done over a long period of time, very, very strategically. And then maybe after a few months or however long, they might start reaping the rewards and getting higher response rates on LinkedIn or other places that they reach out to. They might get higher referrals. That kind of stuff happens as a result. But Mary, I hope that answers your question. It wasn't too long-winded.
It's hard. This is a tough part to explain because there's so many dimensions that you want to be looking at. We've got a multi-dimensional process for for discovery workshops that first requires that we understand some of the challenges that exist in the client company. But I shared, and I think it's a handout that you're going to share with participants. One of the elements is a kind of an organic model that has the kind of the roots to the tip of the tree. It's a tree model for discovery of the EVP, and it goes to the rational and the emotional side, so that we understand what of those elements are highly emotional and that we have to talk in an open way and that people will make decisions based on, and then what are the rational elements that people will check boxes on. But that's, you know, one of any number of elements that we would go through in a discovery workshop, whether it's a one-day discovery workshop or a multi-day workshop.
Let me just mention to everybody online, we are going to be providing you that tree document as a takeaway. You'll actually walk away with something that you can, you know, kind of bring to these conversations, or at least start wrapping your head around how you're going to strategically kind of champion this project. So please do stay on the line till the end. I also want to point out too that this is the first part of a 3-part series, all on employer brand. And while we're really diving into buy-in, why it matters, giving like some basic high-level stuff, how you can go to your leaders and your company and get the traction you need to champion something like this internally, and then what does that discovery process look like? Part 2, I mean, we dive in deeper in each one. Part 2, we're going to talk about crafting that messaging, making sure that everybody in the company knows what that elevator pitch looks like. Everybody can intelligently represent the company as an employer brand, and really building out some exciting and engaging, meaningful content around your employer brand once that messaging is concise. And then the third part is the most fun. It's about amplifying the brand, all the great fun events, the bold campaigns. We've got some amazing stories. I'm just gonna say Trojan Unicorn. You'll thank me later. You want to hop on the third one as well. We've got some really cool experiences to share with you, and different guests in each one as well. So I just wanted to throw that out there before more people drop off. Please stay for the handout for the takeaway, and do join us for the next 2 as well. They're every Thursday at noon. So I'm going to kind of shift into the next part, which is, and if you have any more questions, throw them in the chat and Adrian will get them answered for you. But I wanted to talk about a little bit about ownership. So, you know, we haven't really touched on this yet, although we did throw the poll out there, but who are the stakeholders in developing the employer brand? Like, who has to be involved here? Does it sit with marketing? Does it sit with HR and talent acquisition, the people on the front lines with candidates? Like, what does that have to look like to be successful in terms of you know, partnership and collaboration? I'm going to start with Raf, because I know that we've, you know, this was specific to us at UiPath as I was heading up talent acquisition, and I joined the company when they were very small and early on. I was able to make the decision to bring employer brand under talent acquisition, because to me, it was a very clear correlation. But I'd like to hear from you guys in terms of what your thoughts are on, you know, what role does marketing play and branding play, and how does everybody play nice in the sandbox there?
Yeah, it's a big question, and not necessarily easy for everyone to execute on the answer to it. So I'll explain from my side, and I'm excited to hear from Ray what he thinks. And it goes really in line with what Emily, one of the guests, wrote about being a recruiter and pushing for employer branding, but hasn't built a case before. And I guess it also goes to Christina's question about like when to do this. Yeah. So Christina, I'll answer really quickly. Yesterday.
Early.
Yeah, I mean, as early as you can, really. You know, you want to be ready before any fires do come out, that you can put them out, but also being proactive. Now, of course, if you're a hypergrowth startup, you're in a different situation than a company like Home Depot or an established firm or a brand new company that is really just the founders. So it does depend, but the overarching answer is similarly to market, like, we should think about it like, would marketing ever ask, like, when should we start marketing? The answer, and the same thing like with recruiting. Like, when do you recruit? You always want to have pipeline, right? So it's not different than really any of those things. And to Emily, your question makes me think of a way to answer Lori's question kind of in the same way, which is ideally you have buy-in from the absolute top, right? So at the last company I was at, UiPath, which, again, I got a 7-figure budget from, the CEO I had meetings with. And, he was very accessible. So not always the case, especially at a huge company, 100,000 employees plus, is not so easy, of course. But the higher you go, the more success you'll have. Now, Emily, on building a business plan, we gave some inclinations there. We don't have enough time to really go into details. That's something that I do offer, as a consultant. But try to quantify it, right? Turn it into a positive ROI for the business. That's going to be the true north. But I remember when going into UiPath and starting to build the employer brand, the top people that I wanted involved were the chief product officer, the chief technology officer, the chief marketing officer, and the chief people officer, who was essentially kind of like one of my managers. And if they are bought in, people will listen and do what they're told. And that's basically was my kind of drive forward, is get buy-in at the top to go top down, in addition to getting buy-in at the bottom, going bottom up. So I also, was in touch with some of the individual contributor engineers and salespeople that we, the audiences that we need to hire, and they're the frontline hiring managers, because they're like the mayors in a country, right? They're the ones on the ground that actually have to really deal with the shit versus, hearing about it and making big decisions. Hiring managers are the ones that are actually feeling pain. Right. So working with hiring managers, and creating relationships with them, will get them to encourage their employees to participate. And that's what you need. You need individual contributors badly for discovery and research and focus groups and surveys. And then you need the messaging to also be consistently coming from the top, basically creating an environment where this is the direction the entire team is going. So do your part, listen to your hiring manager, and then everyone is kind of on the same page. That should lead to a more fluid experience in, doing discovery and getting buy-in. And then you might even, if you have the top people in each function involved, you could even get budget from them. So Ray, anything to add?
Yeah. So in working with big organizations, and I see the questions in chat about, at what point does a small organization start? And Raphael, great point. We start marketing from day one. From the moment that you think you're going to need to hire somebody, you have to start to adjust the impression. And that may be by one-on-one contact with 3 or 4 candidates that you're going to meet this week, or it may be, developing some sort of a message that goes out into the public, or a way that you appear in public. But in engaging people on the inside in process, most of my work has been with mid-size organizations of 50 to 500. I'm calling that mid-size. It's defined as small, but and then Fortune 500 organizations with thousands. And in each of those, we tend to look for both a kind of a horizontal broadening of perspective. Behavioral economics tells us that there's this heuristic called the IKEA effect. And that is, if I'm engaged in building something, I'm going to like that product better. So what we would look to do is engage as many of the story owners as possible around an organization at a high level. Those people that own, the sales and marketing, those people that own the public image, those people that own manufacturing and research and development and so on, and get them engaged in developing that story. You also want to hear from people, and this is where in a marketing environment where I was, it tended to get difficult because we were accustomed to making wonderful stories. And at first, you need to dig for the real stories. If an employer brand is going to be real, you need to understand what's going on, the positives and the negatives. And so you're looking for stories of success from your high-performing high potentials, and get a good group of them together that can help build some stories and provide some insights. But you also want to hear from those people that don't feel like they're understood or engaged as much as they should be. And sometimes you find those in your diversity groups, and sometimes you find those in your younger employees, your newer employees, and you go to those stories as well. And then we need to pull that together into a cohesive story. And one of the ways to do that is to kind of work toward a message map. And that is a kind of a table that organizes your segments, your different types of employees, your different types of candidates, and the kinds of messaging that might hit those people at any given time in the journey. So.
That's awesome. We've got some really great questions coming through the chat. I want to address them.
Yeah.
We've got a question about measuring, a question about, and I want to end with Brian's question about kind of what comes first, the chicken or the egg. He asked specifically, so can we create good employees through great synergy, or do great employees make great synergy? I just want to go out with that. So if you guys want to touch on other questions that have come through, Maddie's question.
Yeah, I'll take Maddie's really quickly. So I totally understand it. I totally understand. It's totally understandable what you're asking here, that it's overwhelming to figure out how to best measure success of branding efforts and where to start. Any suggestions on resources to help off the right foot? So, forgive me. I'm obviously a little biased, but I really do. Lori, sorry, what's up?
I was just going to say, frame the question so that when we're answering it, that everybody else, in case they didn't see the chat. Awesome.
Yeah, I just read it out loud. So, Maddie, and for everybody else, it's a great question. It's probably on a lot of people's minds. I'm a bit biased, both by experience and because I really do believe in it. But let's assume that most people here in TA, the TA teams are using LinkedIn to source candidates. And often, not always, but we often see the more passive candidates are often a bit higher quality, not always. Sometimes applicants are fantastic. But generally, the greater population is going to be passive, not in this moment, as we know. Things are changing at the moment. But generally, and when we get back to normal, what I would say, Maddie, is the main metric that I use, well, there's two. My true north of is this working or not, is did my in-mail response rates go up across the recruiters for the audiences that I'm targeting? And in the next webinar, we're going to go into how to bring this to market. And I'm going to go into way more details with that. But basically, is my in-mail response rate going up? And if it is, it's probably a result of the other key metric that really matters, which is engagement. So are you generating engagement with the right audiences? Make sure you can be able to prove it, which is why I love LinkedIn. The reporting on sponsored content on LinkedIn is amazing because it gives you what companies people are clicking from, what job titles they have, what year of experience they are. The demographic information is fantastic. So you can actually align that to the way your recruiters are performing, which again, in LinkedIn Recruiter, you can see what companies are they in-mailing, what positions are they in-mailing, that kind of stuff. And essentially what you can say is the engagement hitting the right audience? And if it is, the recruiter's in-mail response rate should be going up. And that's a statistic that is statistically significant, which I know from having been on the back end at LinkedIn, seeing all the data there. So we know that more engagement leads to better response rates. So my recommendation would be to increase engagement with the key target super narrow audience that you need to get more responses from. So and coming to somebody else asked a question. Caitlin asked a question about buy-in and having a hard time. It wasn't in the chat, it was in the Q&A. Having a hard time getting buy-in and getting budget, and she basically asked what steps can be taken to, you know, do a smaller thing to prove success. It goes hand in hand with what I was just saying. If you can get a little bit of budget to drive to a super, super narrow audience and create engagement that's meaningful and valuable by providing good content that's interesting, not just we have jobs and we're great culture and like not that, but we have great technology and here's what our people do with it and blah, blah. Then you can track, did this increase response rates or did it increase applications if that's what your CFO or chief people officer has a metric in mind that that's the number that they want to see. And sometimes you'll have to dance with, you know, the people in charge. And if, even though you know engagement's the most important thing, but they say applicants is the most important thing, okay, then we show the increase in applicants and give me more budget. So that's my answer to you, Maddie and Caitlin. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, on that note, I mean, the challenge with going small isn't so much getting the discovery done and getting something put in place. It's measuring the results from it, right? And if the results are going to be small scale and you don't have the numbers for quantitative results that you can say, oh, without a doubt, this improved what is not just a vanity metric. We didn't just get more followers from this. We got more candidates, not just more engagement. So you may need to create some performance indicators that tolerate a little bit of anecdotal discussion with hiring managers, with with HR leaders, and so on.
Yeah, I always say that the data that you'll show or whatever should be seen as directional, right? It's not perfect, and it never will be. And probably, if you're going to start smaller, like we were talking about Maddie and Caitlin, you know, the numbers aren't going to be like crazy high or, you know, up and to the right like crazy from a small test, but just multiply it by like 1,000 or whatever the number is. And, you know,
now
that's directional, right? And then you can imagine what it looks like inflated and yeah.
So let's wrap up with Brian's question because I think it's a great one. And I want to remind everybody to come back next Thursday at noon. We are going to be following up with an email with the registration information. Also, if you're on this call, you'll be getting a copy of the recording from it as well. Feel free to share within your networks and bring folks to the next one too, because this is a great conversation. And the more interesting questions we get, the more interesting the conversation gets. So on that note, Brian asked again, real quickly, do we create good employees with a high synergy environment, or the other way around? Is it the good people create the high synergy environment? I definitely think both, of course, but I have spoken to many, surveyed many people, and have experienced this in my own regard, that I could, you know, I am willing to give more of myself, 110% of myself, you know, in an environment where I'm trusted, I'm empowered, where there is that synergy and very tribal team environment almost, versus the old school kind of hierarchical pyramid style model, where everybody feels like they're immersed and engaged in what the purpose of the company is. So many people can say, hey, I've given 70%, did fine in my job, but I wasn't completely and totally fully vested because I didn't feel that the synergy of the company was there, that the culture was cemented, and that, you know, that engagement existed. But then I went to at company B and gave 120% of myself because those things did exist. So that's my passionate answer. It's kind of one of the things that I've tried, and it's not it's very difficult to measure, of course, but it's something that I've, you know, kept close tabs on throughout my experience. If Raf or Ray want to add to that.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, so yeah, it's a little bit of both. If you use your employer brand as a recruitment brand, you're gonna have a belief that you need to replace the group of people that you've got inside right now in order to improve your organization. And that's why it's so important to recognize the full scope of an employer brand is to engage and create enthusiasm, not just rah, 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 but also understand the challenges that employees have and demonstrate that we can move beyond those challenges together. So that improvement in internal engagement, that connection between between an employee and the value chain that they serve, is going to get that organic improvement in your organization. Meanwhile, building on that, your stories going outward are going to attract the right people. You may not hire all people. You can't be attractive to everyone, but at least you'll be attracting and retaining the right people in your organization. And that's going to have a long-term move, but it's right, steering an ocean liner. So it takes time to do all of that.
Yeah.
Bottom line is we have to talk to all audiences and talk about the right things.
Absolutely.
I don't know if that helps. It's a great question and a big
I'll
challenge.
finish the last thought of basically what Ray is saying, and this might be on some people's minds. Employer branding does not change Glassdoor reviews. Glassdoor reviews change because of how the company treats its people. So if somebody comes to you and says, you're in charge of employer branding, make our Glassdoor reviews go up, tell them you can't. Basically that they have to. But yeah.
So I want to thank our panelists. Thank you guys so much, Raf and Ray, for joining. Thank you all of our attendees who joined. Again, next Thursday, we're here at noon. We're going to dive in on the fun stuff, the messaging, the content creation, all kinds of creative stories for you. We're also going to be sending out a follow-up email with Ray's takeaway, the discovery tree. And we actually, I think we may drop it in the chat as well. Where everyone will also be getting registration information for next week's. Really appreciate you joining. If you have specific questions, jot them down and we'll get to them next week. This has been fun and I look forward to doing it again. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Adrian.